All right, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get into it. I plan to talk for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then I really want to get to Q&A and make sure that we cover any questions or anything that comes up during the course of this presentation and this live session. So I love Q&A. That's my favorite part of doing these things. So a lot of good content for you here, a lot of things to share with you. Please use the chat, intro yourself, the live stream chat, and just say where you're coming from, let us know, and then feel free to post questions in there, or once we get to the Q&A, come off mute and you'll be able to ask your question there live directly as well. So with that, let's get into the new Leaders Communication Playbook, the things that I wish I had learned all those years ago when I first started out as a leader, leading my first team at a company. And so let's dive in. Right. So I've learned some hard lessons over the years. Here's a picture of me many years ago in my first role as a director of marketing, leading a marketing team, practicing my Darth Vader death grip on somebody or chokehold on somebody as they dared to disagree with me. No, I don't know if that's it, but brash new leader, more hair than I have now, obviously. Young in my leadership journey and leadership career. And I don't know about you, have any of you ever had a 360 review? Put in the chat if you've had a 360 review and what that experience was like for you. Because about a year into my role as the director of marketing at a software company, this particular software company, I got a 360 review. And a 360 review is the people who you manage review you, the people on the same level. So for me, it was all the other directors and then your superiors, your bosses, the VP levels, the executive levels. Got that review in to let me know what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. And my experience of that 360 review was pretty terrible, I'll say, in that the delivery of the feedback, not that I didn't like the feedback, but the delivery of it was not great. I'll get into that in just a second, but I did get some pretty harsh feedback at the time. Things like Michael doesn't listen. He doesn't take the time to help others work through their concerns and questions that they have with his ideas. I got the feedback that Michael has a great idea and clearly is excited about it and ready to go, but the rest of us have questions. The rest of us have maybe concerns that how is this going to work? How are we going to measure this perhaps? And Michael just tends to be a steamroller. If you don't get immediately on board with his ideas, he just steamrolls over you and we feel flattened, right? Now, I think that can be valuable to hear. However, the advice given to me in this instance was, well, Michael, you should practice active listening more. And the active listening advice was, when somebody is sharing their thoughts and concerns, put your hands on the table, palms out so that they can see you're not crossing your arms or have them down below. Put them out like you're opening. Take an open stance. Write down things that they're saying and verbally acknowledge their concerns with a mm-hmm or yes, I see. Nod your head, but also repeat back things. It felt performative. It felt like I was supposed to act like I was listening rather than actually listen. And so it fell flat. That experience of not only getting this feedback delivered to me in this way, but also not really seeing what to do with it, how I could improve on this, carried through the rest of my career. It carried through for a long time in my career, to the point where here I am years later, a little bit less hair, still more than I have now, with a new team based here in the Denver, Colorado area where I live now, and had just hired this brand new team and still held on to a lot of those same habits of what leadership was. Leadership to me was this position, this ability to wield authority, this ability to dictate what should happen. Dictate to others, dictate to my team, dictate to the company how things should go based on my perspective of the world. Because a lot of that was formed out of this pressure to have all of the answers, that leadership was placed on this pedestal of, You're the one. You're the lone wolf. You are the one to have all the answers. You're in this position for a reason. And that is often fostered in leadership circles. And so we as new leaders, we see this approach, we see this model, and we repeat it over and over again. And for me, with this particular company and this team that you see here, a couple years into it, guess what? I'm out the door because I could not handle the conversations that I'm going to run through today in a clear and effective manner as an actual leader and not just as a manager. We often equate leadership to management of tasks and spreadsheets and KPIs and OKRs or whatever you want to call it. But there is an aspect to leadership that gets missed in our training, in our formal education, in how we're mentored. And that is what we're going to dive into and talk about here today. So I want you to rethink leadership throughout all of this. I want you to think about leadership as being the practice of change and inspiring change, guiding change, motivating change out of others. If you think about all the things that a leader is tasked with, strategy for launching that new product, or how to gain new customers or clients, marketing strategy, sales strategy, working with an underperforming employee, perhaps, presenting your ideas for a direction for the company to a board or to your leadership group, presenting it to your team that you perhaps manage on a day in, day out basis, sharing those thoughts and ideas. Leadership in and of itself, I posit, is the practice of change. Now, in the same way, change is the core of communication. It is the necessary outcome of communication, not just talking with a friend over drinks at dinner or talking with your spouse as you're sitting down at the end of the day, the kids are in bed, you're on the couch and just kind of vegging out for a little bit. That's not the core of what we're talking about. We're talking about communication as the core, or change as the core of communication. In fact, Fred Dust, who wrote the book Creating Conversation, worded it like this. He said, change is an essential component of making conversation. In many cases, it is the goal of creative conversation, the act of creating conversation. Serious, hard conversations that don't enable some form of change are unfortunately just serious, hard conversations. So if leadership is the practice of change, as I position this here, and in the same way, if change is the core of communication, then I'm going to do we're going to go back to elementary school math here a little bit. If A equals B and B equals C, then A has to equal C, right? If leadership has to equal communication in this world. And again, detach it from management, detach it from the activities of managing a team or managing a group of people. Leadership, the act of leadership, is in and of itself communication. It is not an authority or a position to hold. And this actually comes from my alma mater, the Kansas State University Staley School of Leadership. This is taught at our highest levels, that leadership is a process and is not simply defined by position or authority. And I was doing some research into this and this relationship between leadership and communication and change. I came across this meta-analysis in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. As we rethink leadership communication, this highlighted part here stood out to me. In higher quality relationships at work, interpersonal communication is more frequent, and support and trust between managers and employees are greater. Now, what is trust? It is the act of showing up over and over again and being who you say you are, communicating through those instances of who you are, showing up in the same way, building trust that the rug is not going to be pulled out from underneath me at any one moment. And when we can have those higher quality interpersonal relationships built on the foundation of communication, you see this last sentence here, these features allow both parties to accommodate the demands of ongoing change, which every single company is in a constant state of ongoing change. If you're not growing towards something, changing towards something, then you are declining towards something. So I put out there that the best leaders aren't the ones with all the answers. They're actually the ones who communicate clearly, confidently, and with heart to inspire, teach, and guide. And that inspire, teach, and guide has to come from a different place other than certainty about what you know as a leader. And we have to replace that certainty with curiosity. Inspiration, teaching, guiding, all of these things are involved in how we communicate effectively as leaders. We can force someone to change. In our managerial positional authority, most people in that world can force upon someone else change. But I would ask the question, is that really change? Is that person who you are demanding change of really on board with that? Perhaps. But there has to be a lot of trust built beforehand in the inspiration, teaching, and guiding phase. You know, if an army captain gives out an order in a time of intense need or a critical situation, the troops will often follow that order because of the trust built, the communication built, the knowledge built earlier in the process. I was an assistant coach for my daughter's volleyball team just this past spring. And, you know, think about it. Think about the coach who's always yelling, who always is at 100, who's always screaming at their players to improve, do better, get to that ball, all that stuff. Well, I'm not that guy. I'm not that coach, right? And so all the players had, for all the practices, all the games throughout that season, had heard me encouraging them, showing them what to do better, inspiring them. But there was one game in particular where we were losing to a team we should not have been losing to. And in that moment, our head coach called a timeout. She said her words, and then I spoke up. But in that moment, it was with some force. It was some stern words for our players. Look, you're not playing as good as you can, as good as we have practiced, as well as we know that we can play in this situation. And it is affecting us in how we're performing out on the court right now. You need to step it up and start following the things that we've practiced, the things that you know how to do, the things you've been taught. And guess what? We came out and came back and won that game. We won that match. And just imagine the trust that had to have been built up for the player response in that moment to be one of, yeah, I'll follow. I will positively respond to this way of communication. That's a more forceful way, but it only came about because of inspiration, teaching, and guiding. And previous curiosity versus previous certainty. So out of all of this and all the research that I've done, all the interviews that I've done for my podcast, all the things that I've experienced over the 15 plus year career that I've had in leading and growing and scaling teams, out of all of this has come this method that I want to take forward into the scenarios and the playbook that we're going to be going through here today. And I call it the Ask Then See method. It is a mindset shift and a way of showing up in conversation and communication that places your curiosity before your certainty as a leader. And I put out there into the world that this is a far better way to achieve results, to grow teams, to inspire, guide, teach, and eventually get results as a leader versus the other way, which is sheer force and willpower and the lone wolf mentality. So the A in ask is assume positive intent. If we can commit to a belief that people have positive intent, that they want to do well, perhaps even in moments or instances where it doesn't on the surface seem like that's the case, that people are not out to cause harm, they're not out to cause destruction, they're not, like, people don't want to harm their career. It's not an intentional act. Assume positive intent, and that begins to put you in the mindset of curiosity of, if I assume positive intent of that person, what could be different in their world, or what could be true in their world that would cause them to act in the way that they currently are? Then set aside your ego. You as the leader, you as the manager need to know you don't have all the answers. You couldn't possibly have all the answers. And that flows into the K. Know that you don't know everything. So set aside your ego to be right, to be certain, Open up that curiosity box and know that you don't know everything. And if you don't know everything, then there has to be stuff that you could be wrong about. And if that's the case, wouldn't you want to know it? Take that mentality of ask, assuming positive intent, setting aside your ego, knowing that you don't know everything, and then see. Search yourself. Ask questions of yourself and what you believe to be true, how you came to those beliefs, and where the gaps in those beliefs and what you know could stand another perspective. And at first, the first E is explore other perspectives. Look, you don't have to do anything but ask questions in your mind about what someone else might have done in the same situation, what they might be thinking, how the idea you're presenting to them might be affecting them and their department and their role, perhaps. Just stay in your mind and get curious about other people. Explore those perspectives in your head and consider it. And finally, go exchange your curiosity with others. Go and rather than be certain, turn on your curiosity, place that curiosity over your certainty, and exchange that curiosity with others by asking them questions first before, as I did earlier in my career, dictating ideas, dictating answers, believing that you had to be the one with all the answers and all the directional guidance. This closed door or closed off mentality of leadership has to change. It has to, in a world where, gosh, it changes every single day. And we couldn't possibly know everything, to go back to the K in ask. So let's run through some lessons here. Let's run through some playbooks of how we actually put this into effect in our leadership role. And the first is simply how to ask great questions. I'm a former journalist, and even as a former journalist, one of the things that I had to work the hardest to understand was how to ask great questions. Because being truly curious, not inserting your assumptions, your opinions into the questions that you're asking, it is one of the absolute hardest questions or hardest lessons to learn. This image on your screen here, it relays this scientific idea of what's called stochastic processes. I'm going to get a little technical on you here. We're going to go into some biology. So stochastic processes simply mean that in a large population of people or of events, biology, psychology tells us that you can, with a really high degree of accuracy, predict how people will respond, how biological processes will act when subjected to a certain stimulus. The example that it was given to me is radioactive decay. You know, within a population of radioactive elements, over time, how much of that radioactive decay will happen. What you don't know, and this is where what's called stochastic processes come into place, which is you don't know at an individual level what will happen. You know at a populational level what will happen, but you don't know down to the individual when that isotope or when that radioactive element will actually be the one to decay versus that one there. So if that's the case, what we tend to do in our certainty mindset is apply the same standards and ideas to everyone in the population, every employee on our team, every employee within our company, every person within our group that we're a leader of. Perhaps we're at a nonprofit, or perhaps we're in a working group at a conference or within a community organization. We like stereotypes. We like to simplify people down into their basic elements. But the problem is with that one person to person, you never know who's going to be the outlier, who's going to be the different one. So instead of seeking to be right in our questions that we ask, we have to seek to understand. One of the things that you can do on how to ask great questions is to ask what and how questions more than why questions. Because what and how questions, they keep the conversation open. They are focused on solutions. They're focused on a story. They're focused on a path to get to a decision, perhaps. Well, what did you learn that made you decide that was the direction you were going to choose? How did you come to that decision versus why did you come to that decision? A why can feel perhaps unintentionally, a why question can feel unintentionally judgmental. It can have some power behind it where it feels almost like a challenge. So one of the ways you can show up more as a leader in these situations where you have a question to ask how and what questions more than you ask why questions. Whys are, I love Simon Sinek, but in this instance, don't start with why. I love Simon. Simon's a truly model for me. But again, to go inward, to explore yourself first, to ask questions of yourself, you got to ask yourself, am I being truly curious here? Am I ready to be surprised by the answer? And if so, what do I believe? And how can I open myself up to other possibilities? All right. So that is how to ask great questions. Our next lesson is how to give critical feedback. Listen, there's a really short distance between saying, can I give you some feedback? And people thinking that their character is about to be under attack. And so approaching situations where you need to give critical feedback to someone, to an underperforming employee, new leaders tend to avoid this. New leaders tend to just wait for time to heal all wounds and hope that the situation just resolves itself. Or they do a feedback sandwich, which I got to tell you, feedback sandwiches are disgusting. I highly disagree with feedback sandwiches because if you say to someone, and a feedback sandwich is positive feedback, critical or negative feedback, positive feedback. You're sandwiching the negative or critical feedback in between two positives. Those are the bread to your meat ratio there. If I were to come up to you and say, hey, we've got to actually talk about how that campaign went. You know, I'm a marketing director, so I'd say, we got to talk about how that campaign went and the rollout of that. And that person already knows it probably didn't go well. Metrics weren't hit. Goals weren't hit. So immediately they're like, okay, here it comes. Here it comes. And then if I turned around and started and saying, you know, I really liked the creative. I loved how the emails looked. I thought the social media posts were really well designed. And I keep going on and I try to give that positive feedback. I'll tell you, as somebody who sat on the other side of that, what is the only thing that I'm thinking of at that point? I'm waiting for the negative feedback. I don't hear the positive feedback in that world. I'm waiting for, give it to me. I know it's coming. And so a feedback sandwich delays the actual point of giving critical feedback. There has to be a directness to it. A new leader has to understand that well-delivered feedback, direct feedback, builds that trust. It drives that growth and it strengthens that collaboration that we discussed earlier. So here's a little method of communicating this that is very direct. Start with the facts. Say, hey, Joe, we have to talk about that campaign and how it underperformed. The facts are we set this goal and we didn't even come close. In fact, we fell way short here. We did not generate the leads that we were expected to, and we spent a lot of money on this. And we've got to figure out how this doesn't happen again. Now, this is obviously, we go into emotions. This is obviously, you know, it's spending that much money. It kind of upsets me. I'll be real honest here. It upsets me. I'm worried that we have just wasted a lot of money. And the story that I'm telling myself is we didn't accurately prepare. We didn't have the right messaging. We didn't understand our buyers out there correctly. We failed on the research side of things. Now, you go right back to that person and ask them to do the same thing. Share with me your perspective. How do you see it? What did it appear like to you? And they go back to facts, emotions, and stories. Maybe the facts are, you know what? I asked you and I asked our product manager and I asked our boss to review the content and review the user research, and you guys didn't do it. And so I had to go with what I had because I was told to meet the deadline. And so I was really scared that if I didn't meet the deadline, that I was going to be in trouble. And so the story that I told myself was, it's better to get the campaign out the door than wait and delay it, because I was being told this is super high a priority. Great. You know what? Now we can co-create. And we can go through this cycle over and over again. Every time we come up against that moment of critical feedback, we can co-create and say, you know what? You're right. I did not communicate with you that I'd rather get the research, the user information correct here. One of the things we don't want to do, we want to address this kind of feedback immediately. Like I said, time does not heal all wounds. Time does not solve these issues. So the faster you get to it, don't let feedback debt build up. Delivering this feedback, it doesn't feel as big and heavy and weighty if you do it often. Do it in the moment where it feels normal, where it feels frequent and a part of everyday conversation. Don't save up feedback for a dump at the end of a month or in the next quarterly conversation. So ask yourself before giving your feedback, am I stating facts? Am I separating facts from emotions and stories that I'm telling myself? One of my favorite phrases is, the story that I'm telling myself is, you are late to work because you're being irresponsible, right? Like, I'm just giving you some examples there. So am I being clear, not clever? Am I focused on behavior, not the person? And am I inviting a conversation, not delivering a verdict, is our goal here. Next, how to address conflict. Conflict in between, lesson 3 is conflict in between coworkers. Most people were not taught to navigate conflict well. So again, it's one of those things that we avoid at all costs. We just hope that things will work themselves out over time. But I'm here to tell you, conflict is not the enemy. And a new leader has to address it and get ahead of it as soon as they see it, as soon as they sense it. Unspoken conflict is the killer. Conflict debt, as Dr. Leanne Davey addresses it, conflict debt, it is the great killer of careers, of organizations, of teams, when conflict debt is not brought up and immediately addressed. So resolution can come faster when everyone is heard. Again, we place our curiosity above our certainty and believing we know exactly what happens here. What was your goal? Can you walk me through how you saw it? What happened here? And we go similarly back to the critical feedback. Tell me the facts as you saw it. What emotions did that bring up for you? What stories are you telling yourself? And ask each person to share. Uncomfortable conversations often leads to silence, and silence is where problems fester. So I want to encourage everyone, when you go into addressing conflict, whether it's conflict between you and another, a peer, or whether it's between team members and teammates, encourage everyone to consider and ask the question, what could I be missing? That curiosity comes into play here when we obviously know all of our thoughts, our intentions, our perspective, our experiences. But if we begin to take the empathetic approach of what could I be missing and how might that have affected what I'm missing, have affected how I'm showing up versus how someone else is showing up, this is a great way to address conflict. Next, lesson 4, how to report on results. So we've got the compass versus hiker mentality. We as new leaders often fall into one of, I'll say, 2 traps. And that is, we share too much detail and we lose the audience. We get bogged down in the numbers, the results, the metrics, or we undersell the value of storytelling and we miss a chance to deliver helpful context. I relay data and storytelling to a compass versus a hiker. Now, one of my favorite, I live in Colorado, like I said earlier, one of my favorite hikes is the Silver Dollar Lake Trail up to Naylor Lake. And you can see, this is a Google Map image here. You can see where the trailhead starts there on the map. And from all points and from a compass and a directional standpoint, you know exactly how to get to Naylor Lake here. You can hike on the Silver Dollar Trail up to this point where you overlook the lake. You go west, you can see how long the mileage is. If you got the All Trails app, you can see what altitude you're going to gain. You can see what elevation you start at versus what elevation you end at. All that stuff. You can get the data and the information there, and that's really important and relevant to know when you're going on a hike. However, the other half of it, the other side of it, is the experience of it. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you experience out on the trail? Well, I think you all can tell my picture there with my family is a very different experience than me trying to give you the data and the directional compass measurements of the Naylor Lake Trail and why it's my favorite hike. It's very hard to tell from that information. But from my experience, I can tell you the first mile up the trail is in a forest, running alongside a stream, running alongside a lake or a mountain stream that, you hear the rushing water, and it's a high elevation or a really steep trail. So in some places you're going over these exposed tree roots and you're almost on all fours, but then eventually you come out of that forest and you come out into this clearing, and down below you across this rocky meadow is Naylor Lake. And Naylor Lake, it's crystal clear blue water nestled among the pine trees, as you can see there. The last time I was there with my family, a bald eagle swooped over the lake and my daughter started singing the Star Spangled Banner right there. Like, those are two very different ways to describe Naylor Lake, are they not? Now, one is not better than the other. Both serve their purpose. And that's what we want to get to when we talk about how to report on results. We want to give the information, the data, and then we want to contextualize it for people. So I encourage you to use this simple formula whenever you're reporting on results so that you don't overshare. And so you help set appropriate context, that you're balancing the compass and the hiker. The compass can tell you direction, and all the data can tell you mileage and distance and elevation, right? But it's the hiker with the experience that can tell you there's a fallen log over that part of the trail. You have to actually take this shortcut to get up the trail because it's washed out there. Right here is where you want to actually go down to the stream and dip your toes in the water. Feel how icy cold it is, right? So what now what helps set what it is, why it's relevant, and what you can do with the results. If you follow this structure in reporting on results and communicating to folks, then you can deliver what's changed, why it matters, and what's next. So when you start to ask questions of yourself here, you can say, what's the one thing that I want people to remember? Am I highlighting impact, not just activity? We often as new leaders fall into an activity reporting trap where we forget to add the impact, the results, what's changed. And is this relevant to what the people that I'm presenting to, what they care about? And finally, lesson 5 here, how to gain support for an idea. Look, a meeting is a terrible place to uncover resistance or issues. But often we often go into meetings as the big shebang, the thing where we need to sell our idea to everyone involved. And that's where we're going to come to a consensus. And how often does that work? How often do wheels start to fall off our wagon, so to speak? How often do we uncover resistance that we had no idea was there? How often do we get bogged down with talking about the minutia of, well, what's this going to do? What's this decision going to mean? And we fail to uncover those things before the meeting. We fail to plan for those things. Well, that's because the secret here is actually to build momentum before the meeting. This, for me, was one of the greatest lessons that I could learn as a new leader. Whenever I had an idea that I wanted to present for that change that I want to drive and how I'm going to communicate through that change. Often change happens in the hallways, not the meeting rooms. And so when you talk about presenting your idea to a group, have informal one-to-one conversations with all of the stakeholders and get curious. Don't have those meetings to defend your idea. Have those meetings to ask questions like, hey, I'd love your early thoughts on this. What do you think about this? Can you help poke holes in this? What do you see that I'm missing? I really value your perspective. Do you see any problems or challenges to what I'm proposing here that would cause you to not support this idea? How do you think other people are going to respond to this with what you know about them? If you can have those meetings before the meeting, then you go into a meeting already knowing what you need to deliver, to go back to the what, so what, now what model. You can address the what. You can address the so what in answering those questions. And the now what becomes everybody probably is on board at that point because you've shared your time and attention with them, and they've given you your feedback before that meeting. So influence, again, happens in the hallways rather than the meeting rooms. One client that I worked with as a leadership coach, leadership communications coach, he works at a very large construction company here in the Denver metro area. And he had this idea for a new piece of technology that would, a new piece of software that would radically change how everyone in this multi-thousand person company would actually go about doing their jobs. This was no small undertaking that he was asking people to do in implementing this new software. But he saw the value, he saw the benefit, he saw that how it would help cut costs, he saw how it would make people more efficient. They could bid higher on jobs with this software or have a better margin. He had all of that. But when you're talking about changing people's day-to-day function and how they operate, people are going to be resistant to that because it feels like a force to rather than a teaching, a guiding, and a showing and an inspiration, right? So what I encouraged him to do was put his plan together and have those informal one-to-one meetings with everyone who was going to be on that decision-making panel that he was going to eventually present his idea to, and their teams. Hey, here's an idea that I have. Here's how it would affect your team. Here's what it would mean for you. And here's how we would actually make it so that you would benefit from it in the end. What, so what, now what? All that context was given. Those teams got to poke holes. They got to ask questions. He got exposed to what their reservations were, what the things that they were really uncomfortable about, changing software systems or their processes. And guess what? He got to adjust his presentation. He got to address all those in the moment so that when he walked into that meeting to present his plan to his executive team, he already knew he had a thumbs up from every single one of them, and it got implemented. That's how to gain support for a big idea that you've got. You don't want to uncover that resistance in those big formal meeting spaces. So ask yourself, have I invited early feedback from the right people? Do I understand all the risks and objectives that others are going to see? And am I walking into this meeting to decide this issue with partners or with just an idea? All right, that is your final lesson in the New Leaders Playbook. So I want to leave you with 5 questions to take with you. What's my goal? What could I be missing? Those are those internal questions to ask. You can ask of others, is there anything I should have asked to uncover those objections, those sticking points? Or how can I best support you? What did you learn? Help me learn so that I can best support you down the road and teach me every bit as much as I hope to teach, inspire, and guide you. A little bit about me. I'm the director of marketing at The Receptionist and also a speaking and leadership coach, leadership communications coach. I'm a former award-winning journalist and the host of Rethinking Communication. It's my podcast on how do we get better at this communication stuff. And I'm the author of the book, Can I Ask a Question? The QR code on your screen right now takes you to my leadership coaching page if you are interested in more of that and working with me as your leadership communications coach. But with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. So feel free. You can come off of mute if you want to. You can put your questions in the chat. And hopefully this was valuable for you. I hope that these lessons give you a little bit of a direction on, hey, how can I improve my leadership communication skills? What was the diagram with the dots called again? All right, let's jump back here. So that was the ask then see. Sean, are you talking about this one? It's stochastic processes. Stochastic is STOCHASTIC, I believe is how you spell it. It comes from the world of biology. I actually learned about this from a TEDx speaker that I helped coach on this topic, about the world around us being stochastic, but I think it applies to leadership as well. So yeah, stochastic processes, super, super difficult to judge at the individual level what someone will do, even though as a population, we have a pretty darn good idea of how populations will move. Just basically a fancy way of saying every human's an individual, and you gotta follow your curiosity rather than your certainty when you're trying to ask great questions of them. Can you go back to the slide with the 5 questions we should ask? Close to the end. Yeah, absolutely. So here we go. Here are just 5. And just so you know, you're going to all get a link to my new Leaders Communication Playbook that has these questions and a whole bunch of other questions inserted into all these lessons. I'm going to send that out with the recording of this as well, so you can have that resource, that document with all of these questions right in there, as well as many, many more. A lot of the questions I covered today. Any other thoughts, questions, anything else I can help with? If you're live right now, you can also you can come off mute if you want to ask a question too.
Michael, I have a question. I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
No, you're good.
Okay. I was just going to ask a question. You previously presented to Copic on, I believe it was a storytelling platform for presentations. Was that what you, as I recall from last time, correct?
Yeah, for your organization, I did. I presented how to be a more confident speaker and a more confident storyteller. That's correct.
I just wanted to share with you before I get off this that I took to heart what you did, and I co-presented with one of our fellow Copians, and we did Tales from the 3 R's program, where we presented all of the stuff about our program in that story format, where we shared the tales and the impacts on people and that side of things. And it was really well received, and our survey results were awesome. So just wanted to credit you with that, because it turned out really well to do it in that method. So thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing this. This was great.
Holy cow. Stephanie, thank you. That was incredible, and I'm so happy to hear that. You just made my day. So thank you for that and for coming back today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kristen said, thank you. This was great. Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate you being here. Sarah, thank you, Michael. This was helpful as we go into mid-year reviews. Absolutely. Please use these lessons and this curiosity over certainty mindset going into those reviews, especially the critical feedback side of things. That's huge. Yeah, I don't want to stick us around here if you don't have anything else for me. So you can always email me, Michael at Rethinking Communication. I'll also pull this back up again just as we're leaving here. If you want to get in touch with me about anything else, hit that QR code there on your screen and fill out the form that's on that page, and we'll be in touch. I also do trainings and workshops for companies, so much more extended version, 3-4 hour workshops of everything that I just presented here today. So if that's of any interest to you, please let me know. But thank you all so very much for attending today. I hope this was helpful. Be on the lookout for the recording and the playbook, the hard copy PDF playbook of everything that we went through today in your email just as soon as I can get it out to you. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next live session, hopefully. Take care.